Hello, and welcome back to another episode of CleanTechies, the podcast, Season 2, Episode 3, or if you're counting from the beginning, Episode 15. And as always, before we get started, if you enjoy this content, please do like this content. Please subscribe to it wherever you're listening or watching, and please comment your thoughts, whether you're posting on social media or watching it on YouTube. Please do share your thoughts so we can share this and continue to grow the audience. So with that, also, a quick reminder on today's sponsors. These podcasts are possible made possible and sponsored by NextWave Partners. NextWave Partners are experts in the renewables, infrastructure, ESG, climate tech, and tech recruitment businesses. So if you are looking to grow your team or you're looking to take your career to the next step, consider reaching out to NextWave for more information about either of those things. And you can reach out to them on their website, next-wavepartners.com, or you can email them directly at info@next-wavepartners.com. That's info@next-wavepartners.com, or reach out to one of their consultants over LinkedIn. So with that, let's get into the details of today's episode. Today's episode was with Brian Turner, the CEO of Buildings IoT. So I was really excited to have this conversation with Brian. Obviously, there's a lot of players in the BuildingTech / PropTech space, especially in the U.S., given that it's a very large market and a large cause of pollution. So a lot of people in this space. Talking with Brian was great. We have had other guests in this prop tech space in the past, but I think that we had a really different conversation with Brian today, so I was really excited to have him on. Buildings IoT is based out of California, and they're a very comprehensive building tech solutions company that are advising their clients on ways to improve their efficiency and to basically continue to reduce their carbon emissions. So we had a really great conversation with him today. And with that, I guess we'll just let's get into the show. Awesome. Welcome to the podcast, Brian. Appreciate you coming on with us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. So I guess let's just dive right into things here. Initially for the audience, would you mind giving yourself an introduction, kind of what have you been doing? How did you end up here? Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Brian Turner, I'm CEO of Buildings IoT. We are a system integrator, software developer, and controls contractor, specifically working in the built environment, primarily in commercial real estate, education, healthcare, data centers. Basically, we say if there's people that are going to occupy the building for work or for education, then that building's of interest to us. Been in the industry for all of my professional career. Basically, got out of college, had a human factors psychology degree as my undergrad. And it fit really well in this industry for sure. Certainly have made a lot more use of it the last 10 years than probably the first 10. But yeah, so that's me.
Yeah, so I guess could you tell us a little bit more? I'm curious to know about kind of your experience with that degree, and what have you seen in terms of the education system in general, with kind of the difference of how you see it now, with maybe things that are helping people to go in towards spaces that are more better for the environment, that are going to help change the world. I'm assuming back then there probably weren't as many of those options. I'd be kind of curious to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, it's actually one of the things we talk about quite a bit. I don't think the education system is quite caught up to one of the biggest energy consumers in the world, which is the built environment. These commercial office buildings and different buildings that we work in consume somewhere about 40% of the energy in the US. I don't know the numbers globally, but it's a big number. And it's estimated easily that 20 to 30% of that energy use is waste. And wow. even if you just look at the last year and a half since the pandemic, it was pretty widely known that a bunch of buildings were empty and yet still operating as if they were full, using that energy completely, right? Control systems just not well maintained, control systems that were sitting in override mode, control systems that weren't available to be monitored remotely or even controlled remotely. Not a whole lot of AI going on. So I think when you look at the education system and all the things that have really been talked about over the last decade around AI, machine learning, robotics, aerospace. I mean, there's so many cool things to go into if you're a young college student and you're looking for things to change the world. And unfortunately, the built environment just doesn't come up. right? You almost have to stumble into it, and that's still the way it is. I mean, I stumbled into it because my dad was in the industry, and so I was aware. But
Mhm.
you think about you're sitting in class in an office building, and it's a little cold, a little warm, whatever. Lights don't work great, or they work really well. You don't really think about this is actually what I want to do for a living, right? And
Yeah.
you don't think about the energy being consumed by that built environment that you're living in, or that you're working in every day. Um, and and then honestly, if I'm thinking about something to go into and I can think about robotics, mechanical engineering, you've got so many different avenues that you can go into, and built environment just doesn't sound sexy, right? And so um, we often talk about that in our industry, and we're often recruiting from people who had no idea they would ever come into this space. And that's unfortunately a challenge we have, and we'd love to see it change, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I think there's so many things that, especially, people, I can relate to my own experience, right? Once I was growing up, there wasn't this big list of all these interesting jobs that I was like, oh, looking through. They're just kind of the main things you think about, right? The things that you see every day that you consider, career choices. But I think that there definitely needs to be more effort put into helping people understand what's out there, and I think this kind of, talking about these things is important. So that's good to hear. I guess I'm curious a little bit to hear more about kind of the impetus behind, like, what specifically drew you to this industry. I know you said your father was in the industry a little bit, but kind of what really made you passionate to go into it and to make your whole career in this space?
Yeah, I think it really started when after I actually installed some control systems, and I started off in the field as a technician, and really seeing how complicated these systems are. So it's not like your thermostat at home. It's not that simple, and it's one of the reasons why there's so much energy waste. And for me, problem solving is really what I'm passionate about. And I found that this industry is never void of a problem to solve. You never get to a day where you're like, oh, I think I've solved everything here. I can take a day off. And that's one of the things that for people like me who are always just looking to learn constantly and looking to improve something that maybe we solved 5 years ago, but there's a new way and it's a better way. Um, Plus the innovation. So as much as I talked about, the lack of opportunity or awareness of this industry, there's manufacturers are designing devices every day to make the built environment better, right? And in some ways they make it as part of a system, but in a lot of ways it's just a thing like IoT. We have all these sensors now. We have all these indoor air quality sensors now. We can monitor it. You can see it on your phone. But what can you do with that data outside of your phone? If you're really thinking about how that plays in the whole built environment with all the other data that's coming in, if you have people that know how to make use of that data as a system, then you can be a lot more intelligent about how you operate. And so those are the problems we're solving today. I would say a lot of the younger people that work for us today, they are here because they want to make an impact on climate
Mhm.
change. And as they started learning about, how much energy is consumed by these buildings, they felt like, hey, this is the area where I can make the biggest change. Right? Obviously, there's lots of opportunities out there, but this is a big one. And if we can just shave something simple like 3 to 5%, even though there might be 20 to 30% of waste out there, if we can start just knocking away at it from a global perspective, we're gonna make a really big impact.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. There's a lot of people who I think in the space who are pretty, visionary, and they're talking about big picture, but there's also people who want to make a real change right now, right? And I think that you're right. There's so many technologies out there. I think about, being a commercial. If I owned a commercial building and I didn't know about these things, I'd be so upset when I finally found out about them. Like, why am I wasting all this energy? Because I've talked to a few other people on the podcast in this space, and it's just super obvious that it's the right thing to do because it's, first of all, obviously the emissions aspect, but it's also ROI positive. So I'd be curious to hear a little bit more on your thought with, as the innovation happens, right, and there's ways to make things better. What is kind of done, and what are the processes to ensure that people don't say, okay, we've already solved this, let's not worry about it making it better, because there's already some solution. How can we, should we tackle something else first, and then maybe 2 years later we found some new technology that we can, there's something else has been developed and we can build upon that to make it even more efficient. Like, what do you see as how that kind of unfolds typically with technologies in this space?
Yeah, I think so. The tech to do a lot of those things has been around for a long time. To me, and this is kind of where what we can talk about the black eye on the industry. It's the willingness to do it and the motivation to do it. So right now, for a lot of commercial real estate, especially the stuff that is leased or bought and then with a goal to sell in 3 to 5 years, there's not a lot of desire to spend extra money. And so if the building is valuable and it's operating at whatever it's operating at, and you can keep it, maintain it at that state, then from an investment standpoint, that makes sense. And we're not really valuing as an industry or as a society from a financial perspective the investments specifically in those clean tech and those energy saving strategies. For example, in a lot of the world, the commercial real estate world, if I can if I spend money to save energy as a landlord, that doesn't really benefit me because almost all of those costs for energy are passed on to the tenants. And the tenants, you might have 300 tenants in a building, and those tenants don't speak with one voice. So they don't come to the landlord with one voice and say, we really want you to spend this money to save energy, to be a better, have a better carbon footprint, et cetera. There might be one or two tenants in a building that will do that, and they might get their space modified in such a way that that
Hmm.
space itself it has a better carbon footprint, but it's not attacking the building as a whole. And so until we as a, and we've talked about this a lot, I've talked about it on other podcasts as well, is until we get all the tenants actually speaking as one voice and saying, hey, we won't actually rent your building at all unless you're doing these things, right? And it's going to take a pretty big movement. I really thought that the pandemic would have a bigger impact on that than I've seen so far.
Hmm.
I think, and a big part of this is hard. It's a very technical thing to know. You just look at something as simple as a lease, and I don't know how many commercial office leases you've signed, but if you sign one, it will have something about how much when you get air conditioning, when you get conditioned air. It doesn't really talk about that they will maintain healthy air for you. It doesn't talk
Hmm.
about that they will maintain a certain energy footprint or carbon footprint. It doesn't talk about any of that stuff. And so there's nobody holding the property management companies to the fire on those things. And to me, until those types of things happen, either through market pressure, market demand, or through regulation, they just won't get done. And I'm not a big regulation guy. I'd rather see the free market
Hmm.
make choices, but I'm also pretty realistic in thinking that it's going to take some regulation, like we've started to see in New York, in California,
Hmm.
and some other regions where they're putting incentives in place to encourage more adoption of these technologies and strategies.
Yeah, that's something actually I had on my questions, was to talk about what do you think the role of regulation plays here, and are there ways that, I'm from Wisconsin and it's pretty, I'd say it's lagging behind in a lot of a lot of these areas. What can regular people do besides, again, you said, making sure that, hey, we're not going to do it, we're not going to move into this place if you don't do these things. I mean, in Wisconsin, I don't think anybody's really doing these things. Maybe a couple people in Milwaukee or Madison, but what are some things that individuals can do? And then kind of, do you see any ways people could get involved to help push for some kind of initial regulation to get the curve moving?
Yeah, I think there's some stuff being pushed by the federal government that I think takes effect over the next few years that will certainly help. But I mean, when you start looking at on the local level, in the smaller communities that don't have the really big buildings, I think one is just becoming aware. Right now, people are certainly aware of cleaning, and making sure that your surfaces are
Hmm.
cleaned, and that should have been something we were concerned about before the pandemic. But it seems like that kind of woke people up to, hey, maybe every time I touch that door handle, if it's not being cleaned regularly, it could have stuff on it. Um, but also the air we breathe is super critical. In California, we have Title 24, which allows or which calls for continuous ventilation during all occupied hours in commercial buildings. But I will also tell you that some large percentage, and I don't want to take a guess at how many or what the amount is, but a lot of buildings still operate their commercial office buildings like residences where they allow the fan to shut off. And that typically happens as a request from the tenant because they will say, hey, I'm cold. You got to turn the fan off. The fan is constantly on. We don't need it on. It's cold. And so in a lot of cases, the landlord will accommodate that request. And what you end up doing is creating an unhealthy environment. So you don't have any more fresh air coming into that space. Your air is getting stale. Your CO2 is building up. All of those things. And these are pretty techie things, but there are real results. So you asked, kind of what's my human factors? How did that play in? This is a lot of it, right? So human factors is how we impact the environment, but also how the environment we're in impacts us, right? And our being and our ability to think and be proactive and productive in our space. And so all of these things go hand in hand. And I think the more aware we are as a society, the more we'll start talking about it. When we start talking about it, the more that there will be an expectation for these things, regardless of what size the town is, what size the building is that we're renting. All of those things start to take less of an impact. I think a lot of people think it's the biggest buildings that consume all of this energy, and that's where all the waste is. And I don't know the actual statistics on it, but if you look at 80% of our buildings in the US at least are small, less than 100,000 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge energy footprint. There's a lot more buildings out there that are in rural America and the smaller towns, and even the town I'm in, which is 25, 30 miles east of San Francisco. It's a lot of small buildings out here, but there's a lot of energy consumption out here as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that from what I've seen, again, being from a very like kind of slow to change type of culture in Wisconsin, I think a lot of the business owners can be first of all incentivized probably by the economic return of it, because if they're not interested in affecting climate change for the better, they'll probably be interested in that at least, right? But yeah, I think it's interesting you talk about, like, I feel like a lot of business owners can charge a premium, like in New York, for example, right? People in New York will gladly, I'm assuming, gladly pay for a space that they can say is, more conscious of their carbon footprint. So, I want to shift the conversation a little bit. I'm kind of curious to know, could you walk us through what does the process look like when somebody comes to you when they want to do an audit of their building, kind of implement new technologies? I'm curious to understand kind of the process, but also how much of this is physical hardware, how much is software. Just kind of walk us through that process.
Okay, yeah, sure. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about what their outcomes are. What are they actually looking to achieve? And then also understanding what their building is. If it's a 50-story high rise and they have very different outcomes most of the time than a 25,000 square foot building in the middle of a suburban town. I'll give you an example of one, because the big buildings are easier to address because they typically have some sort of automation in them. There typically is not a lot of hardware overhauling. It's maybe software. We might have to reprogram some stuff. We might have to update some control strategies. We might have to do something like that to just make it more efficient. Maybe the strategy that was put in 10 years ago is no longer effective, and we can actually improve that, right? So it's a lot of consulting and let's say professional services. But when you get into a smaller building that maybe just has old thermostats, right, and maybe they still have light switches to turn lights on and off, and they haven't spent a lot of money on automation, and they still don't want to. The budgets don't allow for it, right? A lot of these property owners are running on razor thin margins, and so when you just keep adding expense, even if it's a monthly expense, you see all these as a service solutions. Well, how many as a service solutions can I afford until eventually I'm as a service out and I end up having to close the door? So we have to be really conscious of a lot of these building owners want to do something, they just can't figure out how to for the budget that they have. And so we'll talk to a building owner here. He wanted to make sure that all of his tenants knew what their indoor air quality was all the time in their space, not just in the common areas in the building, not just in the restrooms and making sure he's cleaning everything, but he wanted them to know, look, my equipment, we're maintaining it well. I spent a lot of money, making sure that it's all at least doing the regular maintenance that the manufacturer does, but also we change filters, we're doing all this stuff. So he wanted his tenants to know that, but he doesn't have any automation, and he certainly didn't want to start giving them maintenance records. So one of the best ways to know that is to monitor the air quality in the space, right? And so he decided, I'm just going to spend the money and I'm going to put these sensors in everybody's space and I'm going to monitor it, and then I'm going to give them visibility to it. I will show them what it is. And then the other thing he wanted us to do for him is help track that as it compares to his maintenance. So as his maintenance record, units are being maintained, he wants to start understanding, is there an impact? Is the air quality starting, in between maintenance? What's the air quality doing? And is it better or improved after the maintenance? And he's got 30 properties. He wants to start learning that just for himself, to know what type of properties and which climates, because he's got several different climate zones that he owns property in as well. And he wants to know what's the impact. So it's those kinds of strategies from an owner's perspective that are going to really start to make a change, because he can't afford to automate everything, but he can afford to start knowing more and start sensing, putting sensors in, and start really tracking and correlating the data he does have in order to be more intelligent about his solutions. And then you can bet he's going to be marketing that to his tenants. And maybe he will be able to drive a little bit higher rent because he's doing these extra things to make sure that the people inside the building are in a safe environment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious, do you guys have any kind of things that you offer, special financing for people who really want to accomplish these things? I'm curious because I know that typically, like you said, it can be a big stumbling block for some people.
Yeah, we're doing that. So we will, it becomes a 3-year, commitment, right? So you'll pay X amount of dollars per month for 3 years, and we supply the sensors, we install the sensors, and we do the monitoring, we provide you the reporting. And that way, and then if you re-up the next 3 years, we actually put new sensors in, because these sensors, especially these indoor air quality sensors, they have somewhere between a 3 and 5 year lifespan. Most of them are either battery powered or powered with very low voltage. The battery powered ones obviously are simpler and quicker to put in, but some of them are now coming with USB plugs where you can just plug it into an outlet. And they're really trying to be much quicker install so that you could almost self-install, right? And I think the more of that innovation that happens, the simpler it will be for these operators and owners to do this stuff. But even to the point of a tenant, I know in some countries they're starting to explore ideas where they're making the employers responsible for the indoor air quality. And you can imagine us as an employer sitting here, I'm renting a space from a building owner. I didn't put all the equipment in.
Yeah.
But yet I could have the responsibility to monitor it, right? So we have to also make these systems available so that they're not necessarily part of the building. They're part of my space. I buy them, I plug them in, I do the monitoring, so that I can at least tell my tenant and my own employees that, hey, you're in a good, healthy space. And if you're not, I can take that data now to the landlord and say, hey, look, you're not delivering me a good, healthy environment, right? So you need to do something with your equipment or whatever else. And I think all of those types of solutions are going to be at play over the next probably decade, while we figure out how to build a more sustainable, building.
Yeah, I think that kind of transparency aspect is something I've noticed as a somewhat of a theme throughout this entire climate tech space, is that having that direct transparency for people who are more responsible, that doesn't let any troublemakers get away, or at least it arms you with the data to show your landlord and say, hey, like, look at this, we need this fixed. And then there's no way they can sneak out of it,
Well, yeah, I think for the most part, I mean, most of my clients that I talk to, they all want to do the right thing. And it almost always comes back to money. And so, I mean, your point is well taken, that we've got to figure out some creative way to get this done in a financially responsible way so that we're not putting these people out of business. They need to make money. I mean, that's what makes this world go around is people need to make a profit. So at the same time, we want to do all of this. We want to be transparent. We want to show them the data. And we want people to engage and work together, not use this data in order to, I gotcha, but more, hey, this is what we're seeing in our space. What can we do to fix it, right? In a collaborative way.
Yeah. Do you think, kind of back to the regulation question, that credits? I don't know exactly. It'd be carbon credits. I'm assuming that some type of energy credit could be applied that could be really helpful to get this kind of kickstarted, at least, and get it moving.
I think if energy credits would be interesting. Carbon credits are not so valuable to small organizations, right? I know they're valuable to the really massive global organizations, but when you think about a lawyer's office with 7 partners, right? So what's really going to impact them and motivate them to want to do it, right? And so I do think if you give them a lower energy rate, for example, for monitoring this level of stuff, because all of these things can have direct impact on the energy and the sustainability. If you get the building to be, if we do start creating value creation for the property, like if you're reset air certified, or if you're well building certified, or one of these certifications, if that certification starts to drive valuation, increase valuation for your property, and in order to be those things, you have to have this sensor technology, you have to have this transparency, you have to have all these things, then you get this kind of quasi regulation. It's more private industry and financial regulation than it is government regulation. And I think those types of things can have meaningful impact throughout the value chain, right? From the tenant all the way up through the property owner, property manager, and then ultimately back to the grid, which is what we're really trying to figure out, is how do we become better citizens on the grid, right? Especially
I think, because I mean, integrating, obviously, if there's so much, you said, what is it, 20, you said 30% waste
40.
energy?
Oh
40%.
yeah. So 20 to 30% of the 40% that they use is waste.
Yeah. So, I mean, imagine if you can reduce that, right? That's obviously can reduce the amount of renewables that we need to actually build. That's obviously huge. There's so many things that go into it. But, I'm kind of curious a little bit to understand, do you guys do anything kind of, because you mentioned built environment. When I hear built environment, I also like take into account solar on top of buildings, storage, storage systems, energy storage systems. What kind of services do you offer on those side of things, or is it more of just partnerships you have?
Yeah, those would be more partnerships, and I would say those are emerging. You know, I mean, there's a lot of ideas out there that are not fully fleshed out, but I mean, things like the building itself, there's a lot of companies out there that are, I would say, early stage, that are considering the building itself a battery, right? It's got this thermal load sitting here, and that load can be used to drive other things, right? And I don't want to pretend to be an expert in all of that, but I know that there's a lot there. There's also, if you look at the retail sector, which we do quite a bit in, there's a huge demand on their grid, right? And so now you're starting to see these shopping centers, who are probably the largest solar providers in our country, right? You look at some of the bigger places, and their whole parking lots are covered, and even the roofs of these big shopping centers are covered. And then that's also where you'll see all of these charging stations for cars, right? And some of them are providing it for no charge as part of being a shopper, and some of them are providing it for charge, right? And people are paying to charge up their vehicles there. And I think those types of things we're going to continue to see on the increase. And then we're also seeing the electrification, so getting rid of gas in these buildings and turning everything into electric-based conditioning, which again just reinforces the need to really clean up that infrastructure to be a better, to be more efficient. Because if you convert all of your gas stuff in a building to electric, then you're either going to, if you keep operating the way you were, you're just going to increase your whole load on the grid, and the grid won't be able to sustain it.
Mhm.
Right. So you have to augment that with solar or wind or microgrids. You have to come up with some other way to offset that. And energy efficiency is certainly one way, but then you also have to get some renewable on your space in order to augment that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of small things that can really go into actually helping the business model of some of these places. Like for example, I think it's a pretty obvious situation in the case of malls or something, right? Where there is a large rooftop space. If they have a solar resource, that can reduce their overhead, which we know a lot of places malls aren't doing so well. So that could be some helpful things there. But um, I'm kind of curious. I think there's a lot of things we could go over, but well, I'm curious to just generally hear what would you say are the biggest challenges that you run into in general right now, or that you're trying to solve at the moment?
Yeah, so automation started hitting commercial properties, let's say in the early 80s, and then started getting more mass adoption in the late 80s to early 90s. And what we're really seeing is you have this huge inventory of systems out there that are at end of life, and the expense to upgrade those or modernize those is huge. And so at the same time, you have all this pressure to become more energy efficient, to still be a nice building, a nice environment. You got to have this expense now for cleaning and enhanced cleaning services. Now they've also got to upgrade their entire infrastructure. And it's not enough just to say you got to upgrade your HVAC controls, your lighting controls. In a lot of ways, you're upgrading your entire IT infrastructure as well, right? And
Hmm.
cyber is another tremendous problem or inhibitor here that you have to clear, because if you just install all the new systems and you don't actually pay attention to cyber, then you become a potential under threat of a cyber attack, and
Hmm.
that could be way worse than just leaving things as they were, right? And so it's I would say those are the things. It's like everything all these hurdles that these building owners have to clear, they're all expensive right now. And the talent pool and the number of companies to implement these things in a good, secure strategy and do it well is light. I mean, if you look at us as well as all of our competitors, there's thousands and thousands of job openings right now for this space. And in some cases, we're taking employees from our competitors, and in some cases, we're taking employees fresh out of college who didn't know they wanted to be in this
Hmm.
space, and we're teaching them the nuance of our space. And in some cases, we're cross training, taking people who were really doing well in some other industry, and they found out about us, and they found out about the built environment and this big energy opportunity, and they come here chasing that, right? And so we're pulling people from everywhere, but there's still a huge glut of need out there that we have to overcome. And so those are the big challenges: IT, cyber, aging infrastructure, and talent.
I
So
mean,
you
it's
could
a
probably
really,
fill that
it's
in
a,
for everybody, right?
yeah, it's a massive, I mean, it's a really big nexus where everything's coming together, right? Because you're right in, obviously, IoT has been a term for a while, right? It's been something that people talked about. I think a lot of people, at least when I had first heard about it when I was younger, was like thinking about, the futuristic type of cities. I wasn't really thinking about the energy consumption and everything, but you have all of these things. And obviously with some of the recent cybersecurity issues that we've had in the United States, like it's become much more in everybody's mind, right? So I think it's
Yeah.
that is interesting that you bring that up. And you mentioned the talent. I'm kind of curious, are there specific industries or maybe things you would recommend for people to do to try to get into the space? Again, I understand it sounds like there's not a load of people being educated specifically in this space because there's not many curriculums out there.
Right.
So what are some of those areas or maybe people with certain backgrounds that you guys go towards, maybe whether it's HVAC or something like that?
Yeah. So I always hear about the lack of the blue collar worker, right, for our technicians, because you need building technicians that understand the technology, and I'm not a big fan of saying that worker's not there, because I look at, and I'll just use Comcast, a well-known cable provider, right? They have
Mhm.
technicians all over the place, And those technicians have a lot of the skill sets that our building technicians need, right? And so, but for some reason, they're getting heavily recruited into cable, internet, those sorts of things. We're not doing a great job as an industry getting them to understand that, hey, you can use that skill set over here as well, and make a good living. And in some cases, because of the scarcity, you might make a better living than you do, um, as a cable tech. And then you start at that job, and then you go up. Everything from there is a little bit bigger, right? So, yeah, do you need engineering degrees? Some people do. Mechanical, electrical, those are probably the most common degrees that we see. On the software side, we now have data scientists at our company. There's tons of data scientists out there working specifically on this problem. But I don't know that data scientists, when they first went to school to become a data scientist, that they
Yeah.
thought they would the built environment, right? Or they thought they'd probably be in robotics or something maybe bigger, or maybe they thought they'd be in energy, but they might have thought they were going to be on the renewable side or the microgrids or something that has a little more cachet to it. There was a commercial, I don't know, I think probably a couple of years ago, where they were talking about, you went to work for a train company, graduated and went to work for, on locomotives, right? And it's obviously the next generation of trains and transportation and that sort of thing. And so you don't necessarily go to school thinking I'm going to go work for a train company, but when you get out of school and you find out that, hey, we need to figure out how to move a lot of people around, and rail is still a very economical way to do it,
Yeah.
then it becomes pretty attractive. And I think the same thing happens in our industry, that once you start getting exposed and you start figuring out this is where the energy consumption is. And so you could either be on the demand side of energy and help solve that and make sure that we're efficient there, or you can be on the supply side and the creation side, right? And you work with the utilities and the microgrids and the solar and the wind and all of that. So it's just a matter of making sure that we are part of the conversation, so that people coming out of school or even entering school understand that this is a very viable career for them.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious, on this education topic in general, do you see some ways that it's being done, or maybe some suggestions that you kind of, hypothesize that could be done to help people while they're going through school or before they even decide on going to university, to understand that these roles exist and to try to help them find something that they're passionate about, so that way they kind of guides them with a little bit more clarity through the university years?
Yeah, we are seeing some good movement. I don't know if it's going to happen fast, because education systems generally are they take a long time to change things. But there are several universities here in California. There are programs that are not university based in other parts of the country that I've heard of, that are really tackling this problem in their local communities. It's just difficult to get it done at scale. And I think that the momentum is there. And I think that there's a lot of work being done. I would like to see it done at the high school level, though, because to your point, they should get to know about these things well before they actually enter into college. Because, I mean, I didn't know what the heck I wanted to do in entering college, and so I just put business as my first year major. And it took me a
Yeah.
while to really figure out what I wanted to do. And in high school, I really wasn't taught about anything from a career standpoint, right? It was just, do your classes, do your physics, do your math, and eventually you'll figure out what you want to do. And I think as a society, we're past that. I know my kids are in high school, and they certainly are thinking about things I was not thinking about at all when I was in high school. And so I think we as a society also need to start making sure they're aware of all those opportunities and how they can make an impact. If they want to be like one of my daughters, she wants to be very involved with the environments, but specifically around the oceans and the beaches and the ocean life. So she already has that in her mind. So she's seeking out those types of universities. But she, even though she's my daughter, has no idea about buildings and anything else, right? So I can't even claim I do a good job of it. But I think we
Yeah.
need to make it as interesting. Like for her, ocean is really interesting and calls to her. At some point, the buildings and the energy consumption of them will call to people as well.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think it'll be interesting to see, if companies like Buildings IoT or others start to try to create some types of partnerships with, high schools and getting people. I grew up working in my dad's cabinet shop, and I remember occasionally bringing the high school students to come see what we did, because nobody knows, right? Even in rural Wisconsin, people don't really know what's going on. So it'll be interesting to see that. So a couple other things. One thing I generally like to ask people like yourself who have a really good understanding of what's going on. Do you have any anticipation for in the next 5 to 10 years? What are some trends or technologies or big problems that you think are going to need to be solved after we overcome kind of, the main hurdles that we're working on now with some of this building tech? Because I know that with every major wave of technology, there comes new problems that can be solved because of that foundation. So I'm just curious, what are some of those trends that you anticipate in the next, decade or so?
Yeah, I think so. One, I think AI is going to take a huge front seat in the built environment, right? And really using AI to try to impact change in these buildings. But one thing I think might need to happen, and there's a lot of thoughts on this, so I'll just say might. But there's a few countries who really, really, really control the way buildings are allowed to be designed in order to get permitted. And so mechanical systems have to be effectively the same. Building
Mm,
floor prints almost have to be the same. So you might allow the exterior architecture to look different, but inside the building it's the same. And so you effectively limit the creativity of the
mm,
design engineers on all these different systems. The US does not do that. The US arguably goes just the opposite. Like we encourage the innovation, but what that adds is a huge amount of complexity. So let's just take a data center, for example. We have, I don't know, we've been in dozens of data centers. I can't tell you that I've ever done two data centers that have the exact same mechanical system.
mm,
And so if you constantly are innovating or changing or going for that next 0.5% of improvement, then what you're doing is also increasing the complexity of operating that thing
mm.
successfully, and then also finding talent to come in and just plug in and say, hey, you've got a lot of experience, you know these systems, I'm plug you in. They might know them generally, but they don't know that one, right? Because that one is unique from every other one that's out there, because we're in this kind of continuous innovation. And so I think what we're going to see is some pressure to limit the innovation. We don't, we're Americans, we don't ever want to eliminate
Mhm.
innovation. This is what we do. It's part of our DNA, part of our culture. But I do think we're going to have to kind of pump the brakes on it a little bit in order to allow the AI and those sorts of things to be truly effective. And I think we'll see some movement there. I don't think we'll see it in all segments of buildings, but I think we will see it in some,
Yeah,
especially.
that would be interesting to see if there's some type of standard that could be created that allows some flexibility, but yet at least, they can integrate. And I'm not a tech guy, I'm not a software guy, I don't know anything about that, but finding a way that the softwares can speak to each other, no matter what it's doing, as long as it's all in the same language, for example, that'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, I've
But
heard. So if you think of Tesla, right? So
Mhm.
everybody, I've heard it over and over and over again. If we could just make a building like Tesla. Well, the flaw in that comment is that Tesla is a company that designed every aspect of that vehicle,
Mhm.
from the nuts and bolts that went into it, to the material that was used to fabricate the panels, to the technology that was in it, to the cloud it's connected to the AI that's being used. In a building, we don't do that, right? We're not buying a Tesla building, right?
Mhm.
We're not renting a Tesla building. And instead, what we're doing is we've got a bunch of different contractors that are taking different vendors' products and putting them in. So if we can figure out how to do that and do it in such a way that these vendors, all when they plug their devices in, they're aware, they know what they are, they know what they're supposed to do, they know what data they have, they know what data they need, all of those things, so that you can get close to the idea of what electric cars do. But I don't see us, not in 10 years at least, getting to where manufacturers are manufacturing buildings,
Mhm.
right, that are
Yeah,
fully ready
not
to
big
roll.
buildings at least.
Exactly. Yeah,
Small,
little ones.
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. That's interesting. Yeah, I think that is a good point to bring up. But all right, well, I think maybe just one last small item. I'm just kind of curious. Do you have any recommendations on maybe resources or books to read regarding prop tech and building tech in general, so people can dive more deeply into these topics?
Yeah, I'll give you, I guess, a couple of plugs for some of our industry people. So there's Nexus Labs, which is a great podcast. James Dice is the guy moderating that. He does a great job of educating. Um, there's another one, Beyond Buildings, and I like that one because he's really Nicholas Wern's really talking not just about problems we have today, but like he's really looking 20, 30, 40 years into the future. Like, how do we make real sustainable impact into what we need to be in 2030, 2040, 2050? And so and he really does try to bring in other aspects of it. And then there's lots of different resources that are, I would say, less um, modern, not necessarily podcasts per se, but like Automated Buildings, and they've got a lot of content out there. Not the most beautiful website, but certainly lots and lots of content with some great articles and great content every week. And then from a university standpoint, the one that I would say has the best program, long-standing program, is Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. And then books, there's not enough books about this industry because this industry is not that interesting. But there's a few out there, but I don't know any that are striking the top of my head. And then of course it's just innovation and culture and change. All those books, there's tons of them out there, and I think they all apply very well to what we're doing.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, how everything is coming together with, I think, the social movements as well, and understanding how we're being socially responsible with our earth, also being socially responsible with our employees. I find this very interesting that it's the people focused on the environment that are also leading those chargers, and I'm very excited to see what the future brings. I think that, while we do face a massive crisis and there's obviously, some peril in that, at the same time, there's also a lot of, human aspect and opportunity for humans to come together and do something great. So awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. It's been a pleasure, Brian. We'll definitely have to have you on again sometime. And yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you, Silas. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining today, guys. Really appreciate you joining. What a great conversation. Brian had so much insight to offer. It was really enlightening for me to be able to chat with him. Really enjoyed speaking with him. So I hope you got a lot of value out of it as well. As always, would love to hear your thoughts. Please do reach out to me via Twitter if that's your preferred method. I'm at Silas Maynor. Otherwise, if you join the Slack channel, you can message me directly there. I'm always aware of messages when I get them there. You can also email me, of course. So whichever preferred method you prefer, feel free to reach out to me there. I'm typically pretty good at staying on top of those things. Another thing, would really love to see if you enjoyed today's episode or you found something valuable in it. Please do share with a friend. Share it on social media, or share it directly with somebody who you think really could use this and could get value out of it. And please do consider subscribing to the newsletter, which will be coming out next week. We've worked really hard, Randy and I work really hard on this to produce a good newsletter that's monthly, that gives you a bit of kind of deeper dive into one topic. Upcoming, we're going to be chatting about restorative farming and just clean agriculture in general. So I was really excited about that one. Given my background, being raised by two parents who were both farmers growing up and having spent 6 months on a farm. So that one's super exciting to me. Definitely feel free to go subscribe to that. Link is in the description to subscribe to the newsletter. As well as definitely if you're interested in submitting information to the newsletter, feel free to reach out as well. We're always looking for more contributors, so that can be a great way for you to get your work shared. I know there's a lot of people who are much more knowledgeable than myself or Randy in specific topics within climate tech. So please do consider reaching out if you're interested in support in contributing your work. As well, please do consider if you'd like to support the podcast and maybe have specific ideas. Would love to have a coffee with you sometime, whether that's virtually or in person. Nowadays, it's going to have to be mostly virtual with the Delta variant coming back. But definitely feel free to support the podcast. Reach out to me directly. We can have a chat. And also, you can support the podcast at buymeacoffee.com/Silas Maynor. And yeah, with that, I guess thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you next time on the podcast.